Catching criminals is no easy job.
Making it to arrest you.
But it's even harder when the criminal is a cop turned bad.
He liked having power and authority and status and a uniform.
When the police officers who were sworn to protect us turned to rape,
she was actually meeting a monster.
Murder.
What happened in those minutes or moments or seconds where he chose to go and get a weapon?
Robbery.
He knows where the money is, he knows where the drugs are.
And even blackmail and poisoning. All just to get what they want. In this series, I'm enlisting the help of 3 experts.
That man should stay behind bars for the rest of his life.
2 senior officers who've put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
He was in such a lofty position that he thought he was untouchable.
And a psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
He's a narcissist. He doesn't feel remorse.
In this series, I'll be investigating why some cops put themselves on the wrong side of the law, abuse their power, and commit horrific crimes. This predator raped, attacked, and tortured many women and told them he was untouchable because he was a cop. Hertfordshire police attend the house of Metropolitan Police Officer David Carrick. Carrick has been accused of rape by an unnamed woman.
These are the necessities that I've just explained to you.
No necessities.
Okay.
Well,
And their body-worn cameras capture a defiant Carrick.
we'll allow you to get some close
What is it you're searching for?
articles relating to the offences
in St Albans.
in 2020. This is the allegation that's been made to us, okay, sir?
There's no necessity.
Yes, there is.
I've been a police officer for 20 years.
Right, David.
Do you want me to come naked like this?
No, just understand you're under arrest,
I know
okay?
I'm under
Just
arrest.
explain to us, what do you need?
I'll hold it like this. Don't
Right.
worry about it.
Can one of my colleagues go and get you stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
For Carrick, after 17 years as a serial sex offender hiding in plain sight, the game was finally up.
Where are your keys, then? We'll bring those at least. Okay.
David Carrick was no ordinary cop. He was elite, cleared by the Met to carry a gun and guard members of government, including the Prime Minister. But all the time, Carrick was waging a campaign of terror as a serial sex offender and getting away with it. Until in 2021, an unnamed woman came forward and accused a trusted, vetted police officer of rape. To help me unravel this case and find out how Carrick was able to get away with it for so long, I'm enlisting the expert help of former Detective Chief Superintendent Sue Hill. So, could you tell us who was David Carrick?
Started off his life as a soldier, and then he joined the Metropolitan Police, and he was serving as a response driver in South London.
And what would his day-to-day be as a police officer? What would his duties be?
Basically, uniform cop, people make a 999 call or a 101 call, and he responds to whatever he's called to. So from theft, shoplifting, right up to rape, murder, could be the first on scene at serious crime. I think a response officer is the most critical role in the Met. You have to think on your feet. You have to assess what's going on. You have to keep your wits about you, and you make quick decisions based on what's in front of you.
How did he come about being arrested?
A lady had come forward who he had raped previously, and she felt she now had the confidence to report him, and that's why he was arrested.
What unfolded was a shocking story of deception and brutal sexual assault. After the woman met Carrick through a dating app in September 2020, they arranged to have a drink in a busy pub in St Albans. It was a warm evening. Carrick had pre-ordered wine for his companion, and it now appears it may have been drugged.
He made her feel very safe because he said, you know, I'm a police officer, showed his warrant card. So immediately she was obviously feeling at ease. I'm going to be safe with him. And how wrong could she be? She was actually meeting a monster. She was really wobbly, unsteady on her feet. And then he took her to another pub, and then she remembers being kind of dragged and semi-unconscious and was absolutely convinced it wasn't through drink. And then when he got her into the hotel, he brutally raped her and threw her in the bath. When he's asleep, she grabs her belongings and leaves. And she'd had 2 fractured ribs. But again, she wouldn't report it because she thought, he's a police officer, no one's going to believe me. I went there to the hotel room. I went there of my own volition. I think it's consensual. And so she never reported it.
Oh, well, I mean, it's just horrible to think that she's had to live with that, knowing what's happened to her and couldn't do anything about it. It would be 13 months before Carrick's traumatised victim went to the police, and the timing of her allegations was no coincidence.
Enough is enough! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
The woman came forward just a day after another Met cop, Wayne Cousins, was sentenced for the murder of Sarah Everard.
One bad apple! Rots that barrel! One bad apple!
I'm on my way to St Albans, where Carrick committed some of his most horrific crimes. I'm meeting Lizzie Dearden, a journalist who covered the case for the Independent newspaper.
I was at that first hearing in October 2021. At that point, what we had was one woman making allegations about a date that they had been on in 2020. She said that he raped her extremely violently in a hotel after deliberately getting her so drunk that she felt completely unable to escape. At that time, David Carrick denied everything. And during a debate with the judge, one of the barristers actually called that case an unexceptional allegation of rape. The argument was essentially he wasn't particularly dangerous, and that in fact he was so little of a threat that he could just be released back into the community. But as we saw, quite quickly, this wasn't unexceptional in any way.
I want to ask you, as a woman, how this felt for you reporting on this.
As a woman living in London, it really made you question everything you thought you knew about safety and about the police. This man was a Metropolitan Police officer, and an armed one at that. And quickly, journalists found out that he was in the same unit as Wayne Cousins, who had murdered Sarah Everard.
Wow. And over the weeks and months to follow, it would become clear that there were many other victims, and that Carrick's crimes stretched back years.
That night, I felt that I'd encountered evil. For the past 19 years, I've been lost in my own life, mainly due to this one event. Although I am older, I feel I am reliving the trauma that happened such a long time ago. The memories of what he did have always been very painful, but the truth of that night should be told.
It seemed Carrick's reign of terror began not long after he first became a police officer, nearly 20 years earlier. This was just the beginning of the investigation into David Carrick. Things get worse from here. A lot worse.
So I've been a police officer for 20 years.
Right, David.
Do you want me to come naked like this?
No, just understand you're under arrest, okay?
David Carrick, an elite Metropolitan Police officer cleared to carry a gun and protect the highest politicians in the land, had been arrested for the alleged rape of a 50-year-old woman. His secret life as a serial sex offender was about to be exposed.
Today, an officer suspended by the Met emphatically denied raping a woman he met on the dating app Tinder. PC David Carrick, who is 46, was arrested on Saturday and charged last night.
The story was getting media coverage, and as people started speaking about it, others saw Carrick's face and came forward. Howard Groves, a former detective chief inspector with over 30 years' experience, can tell me how police set about investigating one of their own.
Carrick was arrested, and at that time he denied any involvement in any rape incidents. He saw himself as, you know, the Rambo cop. He'd been in the police for 20 years, and here comes officers in the early hours of the morning to arrest him for what, as far as he was concerned, were false allegations.
A team of 40 officers and staff was assigned to the case.
Those officers who were on that inquiry had to sign disclaimers saying that they would not disclose any of the information in relation to that case, because the officers in charge would have realized that the press would want an awful lot of information about it, and they wanted to stop leaks within that inquiry as well. So it was a somewhat sophisticated rape investigation.
The new allegations against Carrick stretched back almost 20 years. One of the earliest was from a woman referred to as Victim T. Carrick attacked her just 2 years into his police career.
In 2003, Carrick was in a pub and he met a young lady. She was only 20 at the time, and he invited her back to his place for a party.
The victim's words are taken from her impact statement and are spoken by an actor.
I distinctly remember his words. "Come on, you can trust me. I'm the safest person you can be around. I'm a police officer."
But at Carrick's flat, there was no party. They were alone.
And then he intimidated her with what she believed to be a firearm, a handgun to her head.
I honestly thought he was going to kill me that night. I thought he was going to rape me and kill me, and that my life would be over.
Carrick's injured and terrified victim escaped the flat and went to A&E.
The nurse and the doctor asked if I knew who had assaulted me. When I replied it was a police officer, the nurse told me that it wasn't the first time she had heard this. She told me it was going to be hard getting it to go to the court, as the law tends to protect their own. After consideration, I didn't feel like I had much choice.
She never reported it.
I felt ashamed, dirty and sick, and was in so much pain. I remember aching all over from the terrible things he did to me that night.
This attack on Victim T had taken place 18 years before the incident that led to Carrick's arrest in 2021. Alarmingly, it suggested that Carrick had been abusing his position as a police officer to rape women throughout his 20-year career. The common theme with both victims is the way they was approached. In open, public spaces, telling him he was a cop. This man was very calculated in what he was doing. Psychologist Serena Simmons is going to help me understand Carrick's mindset. She believes he was an opportunist who knew how to play his victims.
Ultimately, Carrick wanted to get people within his grasp. He wanted to have power over them, and he wanted to control them. But he was emotionally intelligent enough to know when to switch on the charm. And you can trust me, I'm a police officer, you're really safe with me. And I think that was part of the arousal as well, is he's luring them in, it's bait, he's getting them to trust him, so he can finally get them in a really vulnerable position and really just do what he wants with them, and that was really the aim.
That's the worst thing for me, is innocence. The more innocent they were, the more they trusted him. He could just do what he wanted, because on the flip side of that is terror, and he thrived on that.
If they didn't fall for his charms and his ways, he would actually be quite aggressive towards them. But if they kind of fell for that, they were a potential victim. So what he did then was groom those people who fell for the charm to then kind of pull them closer to him.
And when it came to selecting his prey, it seems no one, not even the people he worked with, was off limits. In 2021, as public awareness grew, more potential victims came forward. Shockingly, one of them was a police colleague of Carrick, who'd not dared to report him for 17 years. They'd worked together in a traffic patrol section.
When you work very closely with somebody in the police, you know, you spend hours together, they work together in a van, close proximity, getting to know each other. And it was flirty, very casual relationship. She's single, he's single. She was attracted to him. She described him as being dedicated, hard-working, good team player. And then it progressed, and then one night she was going back to his house.
She was expecting consensual sex.
But no, when she went into that bedroom, around his bed were pictures of him in uniform, in the army, with a gun, and it was all very different. He changed, and suddenly he threw her down on the bed and turned her over, flicked her over, and said, "This is how we do it. This is how we have sex."
What I don't get, which is bothering me, is she was willing to come back for consensual sex, but that's not enough for him. He doesn't want that. He wants her to fight. He wants her scared.
Absolutely. He doesn't want consensual sex. He's not getting off on that. He wants to be in charge. He wants to control. He wants his victim to be submissive. And she's somebody who's dealt with sexual offences. So has always thought to herself, if that happened to me, I'm going to put up a fight. I'm not going to submit to this. But when you're totally overwhelmed and controlled by Carrick, she couldn't do anything. And he forced himself on her, and he raped her.
I can't understand why Carrick would attack a police colleague who he worked with so closely and with whom there appeared to be a mutual attraction. Why then rape her?
What we need to understand is that that was his aim all along. He only was nice at the start as a means to an end. He was, I believe, always going to rape her. He was always going to do that. He was grooming her and luring her in. He knew exactly what to do to get her into a really vulnerable position so he could dominate her and do what he wanted to.
You know, she's a police officer. She didn't feel she could report it. That's how much control and power he yielded. And he knew that she was never going to report it because how will it look? And she would know, if I report it, I went back there for consensual sex. Who's going to believe her? His word against hers.
None of these victims had previously felt strong enough to report his crimes. Carrick had repeatedly told them they wouldn't be believed because he was a police officer. By 2021, Carrick had been getting away with these horrific attacks for nearly 2 decades. And former Detective Howard Groves believes he would have felt completely secure in his criminality.
He'd always done that. He's never really had any pushback in the sense of somebody reporting the allegations. If you're committing that type of crime over and over and over, and the victims aren't coming forward, are you going to stop? Well, you're not.
Well, you're going to get caught eventually. Surely somebody's going to say something.
Well, he obviously doesn't think that. And he probably thinks, I'm a police officer. I can deny it.
As more and more cases came trickling through to police investigators, questions started to be asked about how Carrick's 17-year reign of terror went undetected for so long, particularly as Carrick revelled in his forced nickname, Bastard Dave. By the end of 2022, 13 women had managed to find the courage to come forward, many of them years after Carrick had attacked them. But were there warning signs earlier that this man was a violent predator and rapist? In October 2021, after serving Metropolitan Police Officer David Carrick was arrested for the rape of one woman, the case snowballed, and 12 others found the courage to report him for violent sexual assaults years earlier. The question is, how was he able to get away with it for almost 2 decades? It could be argued that there was multiple opportunities to stop Carrick. It was first reported back in 2000, even before he became a police officer. 21 years before his arrest for rape, he'd broken into the home of an ex-girlfriend to steal perfume and underwear. When he sent her abusive messages, she reported him.
An allegation of burglary is made, as well as malicious communication. It's reported to the police. It's investigated, but the victim and Carrick came to an agreement that he would pay her money for the damage that was caused. That matter is resolved and no further action taken.
Despite 2 crime reports on the police computer system, incredibly, Carrick was accepted into the Metropolitan Police Force in August 2001. It baffles me how these people are in the police force.
It's difficult. If somebody wants to join the police service, they're not going to exhibit those negative traits that they have. They are going to toe the line, they're going to say the right things, they're going to do the right things. When they're doing training exercises and everything else that you do, or about see how people communicate with others, they're going to do the right things.
So you think there was colleagues that probably knew what he was like and just didn't say anything?
Possibly, because some of his colleagues call him Bastard Dave. So that tells you something. Why would you refer to somebody like that in the first instance? Unless you knew that they were somebody who was unprofessional when he was out dealing with members of the public on the street or in relationships that he had. But that should have been a red flag.
Yeah, 100%. And complaints were made about Carrick's behaviour as a police officer from the start.
Carrick's early career is punctuated with allegations made of him being unprofessional. There was a stop and search incident where the person that was stopped claimed that he was rude and aggressive. There was also an instance where he used his CS spray inappropriately. You know, you'd have thought that should have been a warning sign to the police, but that's not uncommon. There are lots of police officers who have complaints made against them, sometimes malicious or otherwise, but they are resolved. So those instances would not necessarily result in him being disciplined or losing his job.
Journalist Lizzie Dearden was horrified when she learned of Carrick's checkered history during his trial. When you was looking into the past of David Carrick, should he have been stopped before any of this happened? Was there red flags?
It was not until the year that he got arrested that rape was reported, but what had been reported is a pattern of behaviour towards women. And instead of looking at those incidents over the years, even things that looked minor, the Metropolitan Police looked at them individually and shut each one of them down. He was never arrested, he was never prosecuted, he was never disciplined. And if he had been, there's no way he would have been able to abuse women for as long as he did.
Carrick first met the woman police call victim F in 2008. By this time, he had violently assaulted at least 2 other women.
He did have a 2-year relationship with a young woman who he met in a bar. And she was 21 at the time, he was 33, so he was quite a lot older. She ended up living with him for 2 years, but during that 2 years, there was nothing but violence, controlling, coercive behaviour. He was a monster to her. Lots of sexual assaults, rapes, and that went on for 2 years.
But one night, the abuse escalated.
He got a knife and he slashed all her clothes. In fact, she was screaming and the neighbours called the police, and when the police arrived, he hid the knife.
She must have been thinking, please help me here, you know, he's going to kill me here, you know what I mean? He's waving a knife around, slashing up her clothes.
She's feeling threatened. She's had 2 years under his control, so you know what, in front of the police, she probably wouldn't have told them everything, what she'd been through, because she's so intimidated by him. Why wouldn't you be scared to death of him? And there was no further action taken, assuming it put it down to it's a domestic incident and nothing ever happened about that. And he hid the knife.
Carrick continued his attacks on other women, and 7 years later, in 2016, began a new relationship. Carrick ramped up control with his next victim, who he persuaded to live with him. He repeatedly raped her, within earshot of her 10-year-old daughter, and controlled everything she did.
He controlled what they ate, what they wore, where they went. There is a clear pattern with this form of abuse. It's called coercive and controlling behaviour. And one of the key things it does is isolate victims from their support networks, their family, their friends. And David Carrick would get the password to their phone, look through all of their messages. So he made sure that there was no one they felt they could speak to, no one they could confide in, and no one who could give them the strength to face up to what was happening and to help them leave.
It took 6 months before this woman could get away from Carrick with her daughter. I can't understand why anyone could be in a relationship and inflict this level of abuse.
He gets sexual pleasure out of the domination aspect. So to be in a relationship with someone is just to have that at his beck and call. It's to have it on tap. It's to be able to tap into that arousal whenever he wants to, which is why it worked in his favour to enter a relationship with someone so he could do that ongoingly when he felt like it.
I'm looking next at a case where Carrick took his abuse to another level. The police called her Victim J. By the time Carrick met her in 2017, he was a serial rapist and abuser. Just like his previous victims, they met in a pub, but this time he played the long game. In the beginning, she called him her ray of sunshine.
Her first view of him was he was kind, seemed caring. He obviously yet again made sure he told her that he was a police officer, so she felt secure. She'd just come out of a relationship and was looking to move on with her life. And he convinced her at a very early stage that she should come and live with him and he would look after her. And she said she was besotted by him. But as soon as she moved out and came to live with him, the other side of him came out.
When you're looking at someone who commits crimes like Carrick has, what you typically see is escalation over time. So he would have started doing things that in his eyes were minor discretions, maybe touching, groping, saying things that were inappropriate, until it was kind of full submission by the person that he was dominating and degrading.
And if she didn't do what he wanted, there'd be a fit of rage towards her, shout and scream at her, and it'd go as far as getting her to undress, and he'd stick her in a little cupboard underneath the step and leave her overnight, freezing cold. But then, the other side of him, the same way, he would then take her out and they'd go for walks, they'd go climbing. So he was like a Jekyll and Hyde. So she got rewarded when she did what he wanted her to do, and the moment she didn't, he would then mete out degrading acts against her.
So even if he had a relationship with someone he so-called cared about, he completely controlled every single thing they did?
Yeah. He tried to influence what she ate, how much exercise she did. He even went as far as having CCTV in his home, which he would monitor what she was doing around the house.
Throughout his relationship with this woman, he violently raped her and physically tortured her and forced her into degrading acts.
He used to urinate in her mouth and make her drink his urine. I mean, he just inflicted every demeaning behaviour, controlling behaviour that you can think about on this poor woman. The more he did it, the more isolated, the more controlled she became, the more vulnerable. She even left her job as a mental health nurse, and he controlled everything she did. In fact, he sent her a message with a picture of him in uniform saying, "Remember, I am the boss," and that's the photograph he sent. How intimidating is that? He used his chain, he used to whip her, and then he used to take pictures of the injuries on her body that he used when he was whipping her with his chain.
He catalogued those injuries. Psychologist Serena Simmons believes these long-term relationships were the ultimate form of domination for Carrick.
It's why he was so utterly cruel to them. He wanted to see their pain, to see their degradation, and it's that gave him the thrill, which is, again, it's hard for us to understand, but that was the function of his crimes. That's what he did it for.
If you are being treated like that, why would you just not leave?
Someone that gets stuck in a relationship like that, and they are stuck, they're stuck because of utter fear. Fear that if I go against what this person is saying, that it will be worse, that they won't be believed, that they may even suffer violence that's even worse than what they've suffered already.
The woman eventually found the courage to leave Carrick, but it took 10 months and a family intervention to help her escape.
Well, fortunately, her sister supported her, and she eventually left and went off with her sister, who lived some distance away. In fact, when she did eventually leave, she took the chain with her, and she took it away because she thought, you know what, no other woman's going to be beaten with this chain. And that was introduced in evidence, and because that's what he used to physically attack her, not only raping her, not only controlling her, but actual physical assaults on her as well.
I want to know if there was anything in Carrick's work as a police officer that could have taught him how to subdue his victims without the risk of getting caught. Lizzie Dearden thinks there was.
He had actually done a course on domestic abuse. What he would have learned in that course is what's needed for a charge, what's needed to take a case across the line. Wow. And that also teaches you what will stop a case, what's not enough, what will stop a case going forward. And it seems likely that he used that knowledge from way back in 2005. And his experience as what's called a response officer going to day-to-day calls, a lot of them would have been domestic abuse, some of them would have been sexual assault. And he took all of that knowledge and put it into how he treated women to make sure that they would be as reluctant as possible to go to the police.
On many occasions between 2000 and 2021, Carrick was reported to different police forces, but it seems nothing was done until one brave woman made a phone call that opened the floodgates. After multiple women stepped up and recounted graphic horror stories of the rape and torture they suffered at his hands, elite Metropolitan Police Officer David Carrick is under arrest and in the custody of police colleagues. But even as the investigators sift through the harrowing testimonies, he continues to deny the accusations. All right, so this video is where Carrick is being arrested.
These are the necessities that I've just explained to you, therefore.
His arrest at his home in the early hours of October 2nd, 2021 took him completely by surprise. I'm watching the moment his evil world came crashing down with psychologist Serena Simmons.
Well, it'll allow you to get some close.
What is it you're searching for?
Articles relating to the offences.
In St Albans?
In 2020. This is the allegation that's been made to us, okay, sir?
There's no necessity.
Yes, there is.
I've been a police officer for 20 years.
Right. David.
Did you hear that?
I certainly did.
He's also trying to still play the fact that I'm a police officer. You can't arrest me.
Absolutely, still hiding behind the facade and still trying to dominate the conversation as well. So really trying to be evasive and still control what people are doing. Also, maybe I know more than you. I've been doing this longer than you. So we don't know the age or the profile of the person that's asking the questions. So even in that position that he's in, he's still trying to have some hand in dominating the situation.
Right, yeah.
Do you want me to come naked like this?
No, just understand you're under arrest, okay? No. Just explain to us, what do you need?
I'll pull out like this. Don't worry about it.
Can one of my colleagues go and get you stuff?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Can we just pause it there? Right. Look at him. Hands crossed, folded like this, head down. And what does that body language tell you?
I think this has caught him obviously completely off guard. It's the middle of the night, he's naked, so being in this position would have made him feel incredibly vulnerable. So this is not someone who's used to feeling this way, which is why I think we're seeing something really unusual in how he's presenting here. And yet we see this pathetic character now. He's almost shrunken to this little boy because he's not used to being this vulnerable.
Enough is enough! Enough is enough! Enough is enough! Enough is enough!
Once the investigators had enough evidence to put a case together against Carrick, they submitted the first charge and triggered a secondary wave of victims.
Carrick, once he was charged, he was detained in Belmarsh prison. His name was out there, and then other victims, realising he's now in prison, he can't get them, they came forward, believing then actually the police would be on their side and believe what's happened to them. And then one by one, those charges, indictments were laid against him, and he appeared at Crown Court.
He was a serving police officer with a duty to protect others, but instead he's one of the worst sexual offenders in modern history.
13 women between them brought 53 charges against David Carrick, including rape, assault, false imprisonment and coercion. Carrick pleaded not guilty to all of them.
When someone gets arrested and they get charged, and before they go to court, they'll normally plead not guilty for the simple reason They want to make sure that the prosecution have everything possible to convict their client. So the defense will say, no, we don't plead, because if 2 or 3 victims have cold feet at the end of the day and say they don't want to know for whatever reason, if I've pleaded, that's it. I'm going inside. So it's a game that the barristers and the lawyers play during that judicial process. He would have gotten advice to say, you plead not guilty, right up until the last point.
The 48-year-old former constable arrived at Southwark Crown Court after admitting attacks on 12 victims over 17 years.
14 months after his arrest, with a mountain of evidence against him, Carrick finally changes his plea.
Carrick looked down as the counts were read out at Southwark Crown Court. The only words to leave his mouth, guilty.
It takes almost an hour for the court to read through the charges against him. Carrick pleads guilty to all of them, but one.
The only case eventually that he pleaded not guilty to was the lady that came forward and who was the most recent attack. If it hadn't been for her, he would still be a serving police officer and still preying on the vulnerable people out there.
Why would he plead guilty to all the other charges and not that one?
The only thing I can think is that it was revenge. It was that woman coming forward that sparked the first charge. It was that charge that sparked the media coverage. It was that media coverage that caused the other victims to come forward and ultimately his years and years of lies to fall down. I can only think that it was some form of revenge on that woman for being the first and for causing all of this to happen.
So in his eyes, it's a little win for him?
Yeah, it was one last move of control, one last way of damaging a woman, and that's the one case where the prosecution said they weren't going to chase him for it, and essentially he got away with it.
Right to the end, Carrick played the control game, even with the justice system itself. Even after changing his plea, he tried to argue for leniency in the sentencing by claiming a traumatic childhood.
He's alluded to having a very bad upbringing, very negative, his stepfather being very abusive, and we know that they've said that what he has said about his upbringing is false.
I think they were living in what I would describe as a normal, happy family environment. He was a bright youngster. But things changed once his mother divorced and married someone else. He didn't like his stepfather or his step-siblings, and that created a lot of friction within the family.
But the court rejected Carrick's version of events and the suggestion that his upbringing had any bearing on the pain and suffering he inflicted on others.
For me, it was 50-50. Is this person exhibiting signs of psychopathy? He actually did spend some time in Rampton Hospital for assessment. Having worked there myself, ex-colleagues of mine would have assessed him, and he was deemed to be functional. So no other personality disorders or mental health issues. So you're looking at someone really who is just bad.
In February 2023, Carrick is sentenced at Southwark Crown Court.
The details of David Carrick's crimes are truly shocking. I suspect many will be appalled and sickened by his actions. But I hope the victims and the public more widely are reassured that no one is above the law, and the police service will relentlessly pursue those offenders who target women in this way.
He received 36 life sentences with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 30 years imprisonment. Still not long enough.
PC David Carrick was an armed officer in the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. Throughout it all, he bragged that his position as a police officer would protect him. And for 18 years, that seemed to be the case.
Carrick is convicted and off the streets. But it's a dark day for the Metropolitan Police.
Serious questions are being asked today about why the Metropolitan Police failed to spot just how dangerous Carrick was, despite being informed of repeated allegations against him during his 20-year career.
For nearly 2 decades, a serial rapist has worked in their midst. He was one of their most vetted cops, a parliamentary protection officer, cleared to carry a gun and guard the highest politicians in the land.
there'll be women across London and more widely. This prompts them to question whether the police can keep them safe. And for that reason, I think it's important that I recognise that we failed, and I'm sorry, and I know we've let women down. One of my top priorities was restoring trust, and to do that, I know I need to be ruthless in rooting out those who corrupt our integrity. On my watch, we'll be ruthless about restoring our integrity and about winning back the trust of Londoners.
Do you think there's anything the police could have done sooner to stop David Carrick?
We know that there were at least 5 different forces that were investigating Carrick, and they all kept that information to themselves. If they had a system, at least if they had a joined-up approach, the Met would have known from the 5 different forces what those allegations were, and they could then decide what they were going to do. But they didn't have that system in place to be able to alert the Met that this was an individual here where allegations of domestic assault and abuse had actually been made. Most of those occasions, no further action was taken.
It's difficult to say we can ever stop a man like David Carrick. When he pleaded guilty, it meant that his victims didn't have to be questioned. It was a huge relief, but it also meant that he didn't have to be questioned. So one of the big questions about David Carrick is why? Why he did it, what made him do it, so many years, so many women. And because we don't have that knowledge, it's hard to know what can be done to stop it happening again. We don't really know what drives men to do this. Really, we should be stopping men raping women, but a lot of the focus has ended up on women stopping themselves being raped by men.
David Carrick, an ex-uniformed police officer, is officially one of the most prolific sex offenders in modern British history. It's only the courage of his victims that finally brought his reign of terror to an end.
I feel that I have missed out on 19 years of my life because this man did this terrible thing to me. He took away who I was and left me lost in my own life. The truth of that night should be told, and he should be held accountable for his actions.
He's not a cop. He's let the reputation of policing down. He's a really, really bad apple. He's not up for parole until about 2052. Let's hope he never gets out. That man should stay behind bars for the rest of his life.
David Carrick loved the power of his position and used it to abuse women and get away with it for nearly 2 decades. This evil, twisted monster of a man was brought down by the very people he thought he had power over. And in the end, these brave women stepped forward to make sure he could never do it again.